Commission meeting, 2014, or correction, November 14th, 2019. At this time, we will entertain public comment. So I have an extensive list. The Planning Commission would respectfully request if you would like to be heard. Well, thank you. The Planning Commission would request if you'd like to be heard. We would be, I'll call you by name. We're also requesting that in the spirit of repetitiveness, if you would just like to say you're in support of the project, that would be welcomed. But we understand who's in support and who may not be in support. So if we don't have anything to add, we'd appreciate if you could limit and just say, you know, in support and not support. But by all means, everybody is welcome to come and speak, as it is public comment. So with that, we'll start down the list. As I call your name, public comment will be strictly limited to 3 minutes, as we have roughly 40 people on the list, which could carry us here till about 4 o'clock today. So, Joshua Willis. For all public commenters, please state your name and where you're from.
Hello, I'm Joshua Willis, lifelong resident of Kent Island, currently live in Stevensville, grew up in Chester. I have notes here, so if I'm not looking up the whole time, that's why I don't want to forget anything. I am against it, the further development of it, with multiple concerns. So, many people don't realize the significant history of Kent Island, founded in 1631. It's the third settlement in America, side next to Jamestown and Plymouth. I'm currently making a push to have that recognized as such and have more people understand the significance of the land and the history. One of those things being the John Benton farmhouse that was on the property until recently. It was a 19th century farmhouse with an 18th century foundation. It actually burned down at the beginning of the development of this project, but it was there for 150 plus years, and I strongly urge others to look back there and see if there is anything else back there if this project does go through before we lose any kind of historical value underground. Regarding the surrounding waters, being Cox Creek and Macomb Creek, as well as the Chester River, I understand the studies have been done, but I find it impossible that the further building of these houses will have zero effect on the waters. It's one of the largest developments in critical area in the state of Maryland, if not the largest. I haven't done all the numbers, but I do understand how large this is in a critical area. Adding more housing and residents to an island with limited road infrastructure is simply irresponsible. Traffic is already noticeably worse in the Four Seasons area, as well as the entire island, and will only get worse with additional residents. Aside from that traffic study, a free study is, it's an area surrounded by water with an infrastructure limited to the area surrounded by water. If you add more residents to that, the bubble gets bigger and nobody has anywhere to go. So it is an anomaly outside of the bridge. I did hear that somebody mentioned that the bridge traffic was an anomaly, or the construction of that being an anomaly, which is untrue as well. The bridge will always be worked on, it'll always need maintenance, and it happened about 15 years ago. So for that to be excluded from the traffic study, I feel like that was an irresponsible move as well. I also heard something about Route 50 not being considered in the regional growth study because, or Route 50 being the only thing considered in the regional growth study because it is the main highway through there. However, multiple times I've heard that Route 18, the secondary road that crosses Kent Island, is not legal to say that it is only open to local traffic. So that immediately becomes Route 50 after Route 50 stops. So that being excluded from the traffic study, I do find that as being irresponsible as well. I think that should be looked at again. I've lived there my entire life. I currently still live there. I see it every single day. It's not just Saturday and Sunday. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in the summer. And if this traffic study was performed when I think it was, if I looked it up correctly, which was a Sunday in February with snow on the ground, that is one of the least traffic days on Kent Island. So just something else to consider. Now, that was a 2004 study. I don't know about the most recent, but nothing's gotten any better. Let's see. I would also like to question, I don't know how this is regulated, but how will the 55 plus neighborhood be regulated to stay 55 plus? Who is to stop somebody from having children or grandchildren live with them and go to school? I don't understand all of that, so I'm not going to speak towards that, but I just feel like that's something that should be questioned as well.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. We appreciate
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Please forgive me if I mispronounce some of your names. We have Mary Jo Jamatis.
She had to leave.
Okay. Jay Falstead and Tracy Haas on deck.
Hello, everyone. Jay Falstad from Queen Anne's Conservation Association. And just a couple of things that I'd like to add to the record. The renderings that you all saw and all of the photographs that we've seen were impressive. And I have to say, just looking at them, they all look great. But they are missing something that I hope you all will take into consideration. And in fact, the counsel for the other side invited you to do it. One thing that's missing is the county has a sea level rise and coastal vulnerability assessment and implementation plan report. And if you all, and if everybody in this room, especially those people that have bought properties at the Cahovanian site, would look at that summary, you'll see that in about 20 years, there's going to be 2 feet of water lapping up against this property. What that means is that we had an independent engineer evaluate the stormwater controls, stormwater plan, and it shows that most of the outfalls on this project will be underwater. And so when you start to factor in storm surge and some of the other things, in our view, we believe that this proposal in the Four Seasons project is a very poor and costly long-term investment for anybody that's bought a house there, costly to Queen Anne's County, and an environmental mess for the Chester River. I have a document that I want to submit for the record that was prepared by our lawyer for you all to look at. I think that's enough for everybody. And lastly, Commissioners, I just want to point out one thing. The applicant's president said that they have been in compliance with MDE, and that is just a flat-out lie. Back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, they had a huge stormwater event there that resulted in a $30,000 fine from MDE. And to say that they've been in compliance all along the way is just not accurate. Along those lines, if you go back into the record, Cahovanian entered into a settlement agreement with the EPA that resulted in a $1 million fine on over 570 projects across the country. 79 of those were in Maryland alone. So to somehow think that these guys have learned their lesson and that they're good on stormwater management, the record at both the federal and state level tells a whole different story. And I urge you to look into that a little bit before just automatically approving these guys, because eventually this is something that we're all going to have to deal with. And when you all were looking at the stormwater dimensions of the library, this thing is 100 times bigger than the library. So I'll leave it there, but I hope you'll look into it a little deeper.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Falstead. I would have one, I guess, challenge for you. If you and the Queen Anne Conservation would maybe reach out to Four Seasons and offer grant money, as you guys are offering to protect the bay. You know, maybe if you went out of your way to help them increase for the sea, for the rise in the sea level, maybe you could help fund as part of a grant to help this. I think that would go a long way in extending the olive branch.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly. I will allow you that opportunity because I brought it up.
So I don't have my calendar right in front of me, but a number of years ago, I think when Mr. DeCiceris was part of Cahovanian, we did have multiple meetings with them.
So, we're here today. I'd like to move forward and grow. If we want to reach back into the past, we could talk about many things. We could talk about photos that were submitted here and then in Dorchester County and
Well,
multiple
let me
places.
finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
The point is that we left the door open with Kay Hovanian to have those discussions. We're willing to have that dialogue as a means of trying to find some solutions. However, as things stand right now, we still have major concerns, but the door is open.
Wonderful. Thank you for extending that olive branch. So, no Ms. Haas. We have Tom Tumultry, Garrett Timbaro, Doug Shipe. Oh. So, you are,
I am not Garnet Timbario. She had to leave. I'm Carol Conrad, and I'm going to read her statement, if that's okay.
did you sign up later on in the?
I did, way at the end. But I'm not going
Okay,
to say,
wait,
this is Garnet speaking.
You're going to come back up
Th-
later and say your own piece?
If it's not already been covered.
so that, you'll have to wait for your place. You can submit that into the record?
This is Garnet's place,
Okay, that can be submitted into the record?
okay?
Okay, thank you. Doug Shipe?
I will.
On deck is McIntosh, Mac McIntosh. Yes, sir.
Hello. I'm Doug Shipe. I'm the community manager for Four Seasons at Kent Island. I thank all of you for your service to this county. I'm gonna just say that I am strongly in support of approval of this plan and allow more of our homeowners to speak. I think you really want to hear from them.
Thank you. Mac McIntosh. Next on deck is Tim Glass.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Mac McIntosh. I'm a Queen Anne County resident, 30 years. Live in Stevensville, Maryland, Tower Gardens. I come today obviously in support of the project. I've spoken on behalf of the project many times in the past and written articles about it. You know, I think you can look beyond the pictures, the graphics that were shown today. You can ride through the community, and I think it speaks for itself as something that's very attractive on Kent Island. You know, my concerns in Queen Anne County are tax base, you know, and lack of ability to grow it. You know, we just lost a Kmart store, you know, and things of that nature. So, you know, I view these residents as a good ad for the county. I think they're intelligent people that don't travel during peak travel times, you know, and to that end. So, you know, I'm for it because it doesn't burden the schools, it adds to our tax base. You know, many parts of this country are building assisted living facilities that people are moving into. Those aren't paying real estate taxes for the most part as individuals. You know, they're serving another need for people that needed assisted living. Finally, I want to say that my wife works for Chesapeake Hearing Centers, and you know, I'd love for her not to have to leave the island. They have an office in Stevensville. They also have offices in Annapolis and Severna Park. So she has to go to Annapolis and Severna Park often because they didn't have enough clients, customers, patients on the island. They've added about a half dozen patients just in the time that the residents have been moving into Four Seasons. So good for local business. Hopefully keeps my wife off the bridge in the future, which would all be a good thing. So that's what I have to say today. Is I'm just in support for a lot of reasons. I see a lot of positives. And to say that anyone is automatically granting them permission for phase 2 or phase 1 or whichever phase, I see everything but that. Nothing's been automatic. You know, they've been tested every step of the way, and I think they've measured up well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Tom Bavesio. Gene Judge is on deck.
Good Afternoon. My name is Tom Bavino. My wife and I have been residents of Queen Anne's County for just about 20 years now. We lived in Stevensville, we lived in Graysonville, we now live in Four Seasons in Chester. And I would just say that we really love Queen Anne's County. We love this community. Our house is awesome. The people have been great, but you know, I'm not an expert, but I look at the roads and I look at the landscaping, and I've got to believe they're doing everything that they're supposed to be doing. It to me, it's the nicest part of Queen Anne's County right now. And to just speak to what the previous gentleman said, you know, I know a few business people in the community, and I just have to believe 1,000 families of my demographic has got to be good for the tax base. It's got to be good for the restaurants. It's a little tough at happy hour, but we can deal with that. But besides that, I mean, I think I am very, very much in support of this community.
Thank you. Gene Judge. Next on deck is Don Castellano.
Good afternoon. I'm Jean Judge, and I'm a 20-year resident of Queen Anne's County. I presently live in Bayside, which has been referred to many times today, and it is abuts the Four Seasons. I've been a supporter of the Four Seasons for probably 15 years now, and I've followed a lot of it. I'm pretty active on the island. I'm a board member of the Yacht Club and an active parishioner of St. Christopher's, so I do get around on the island pretty much. And also, I traveled back and forth for 13 years that I first lived here. Now I'm lucky enough to be retired. But when Mr. Falstaff talked about Four Seasons, he made it sound like the Four Seasons burned the house down. That was burned down by a local resident. So the historic house had nothing to do with Four Seasons whatsoever being lost in it. And also the storm warning event was taken care of a long, long time ago. And I've been listening to him now for probably 15 years, and some of the things that he says are so biased. And of course I am biased because I am presently waiting for the condo buildings to be built so that I can be one of their first residents there. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. And for the record, you're going to address that?
Ma'am, you may blame Mr. Falstad for a lot of things, but he wasn't the one that said that the house got burned down.
I was going to make that was Mr. Willis.
Oh, okay.
So I was going to make that same correction.
I stand to be corrected. I'm sorry, Mr. Falstad.
Don, Mr. McQueenie on deck.
Hello, my name is Dawn Casterline, and I'm from Crofton, Maryland. I am a sales consultant at Four Seasons Ken Island, and I am very, very much in favor of the community. A lot of the people that we do see live in the surrounding area and want to stay within this area with like-minded people who are looking to retire. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next on deck, Edward Pearsley.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name's John McQueenie. My address is 1 Queen Victoria Court, Chester, Maryland. I live 2 blocks away from Four Seasons. I'm the one to blame, along with George O'Donnell and Marlene Davis, for signing the Developers' Rights Agreement. We studied that for 3.5 years. It's the most lucrative developers' rights agreement ever signed on the Eastern Shore. It was 17 years ago. It is still, to this day, the most lucrative. Some people might think that we just signed it haphazardly in the last few months of our term, but we studied it for over 3.5 years, met with all the communities. We got rid of the commercial part because some of the communities didn't want it. We got rid of the storage facility because it faced Bayside. And Four Seasons was in agreement with all of this. And we reduced, at one time, we got rid of the apartments. They didn't want apartments there. And we've had, went from 2,300 homes down to 1,300 and some. And for that, we signed the agreement with 30-some options that also gave the counties 30-some million dollars worth of what we called extras. They have lived up to their agreement 100%. In fact, they've gone over it. I'm impressed that they're giving 130-some acres to the county. They're only building on half the property. And I like the section that they gave the Cross Island Trail. For everything I've been blamed for, the Cross Island Trail was my idea, and it's been my baby ever since. But you got to look at the facts and don't look at the fallacies, I guess is the best word to say. There will not be any children. You'll never see a school bus ride through Four Seasons. There won't be kids staying there for an extended time. They might visit their grandparents for a couple of days. Who's going to take care of it? The people right behind me. They're not going to allow it. All you got to do is go up to Symphony Village. You won't see any of this happening. And it's not going to happen at Four Seasons because that's their baby. I guess the last thing is you hear Four Seasons, well, I don't know, they're on shaky ground. Any builder back here, not one of them's going to tell you that they don't get paid right on schedule. So what I really ask you is just look at the facts and don't look at the fallacies. Thank you very much.
Just for clarification, Mr. McQueenie, that 137-acre gift that exceeded the requirement that you set forth, wasn't that, if I remember right from what I read in preparation for the meeting, wasn't that a result of the state having denied a wetlands permit for a bridge to access that land?
I was only involved in the Developers' Rights Agreement of 2002, and that wasn't part of it.
That is the
But yes,
137 acres,
you are
isn't it,
correct,
that there
Ms.
wasn't
Stein.
access?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that you are correct. Edward Pursley, Ray Smoot, Vicky Smoot on deck.
Good afternoon. You must be weary after this long morning. My name is Roy Smoot. My wife, Vicki, actually went home. We are residents of Four Seasons, have been for the last 5 months. My wife is a multi-generational resident of the Eastern Shore in Talbot County, Somerset County. And we recently moved from St. Michael's because we love the shore life. But there are a lot of things that happen when you reach retirement, and that is there are a lot of things that we didn't want to take care of in an older home. And we were in search of a community of like-minded individuals, and I'm surrounded by them. We're keeping the Eastern Shore lifestyle alive. We came in, we were one of the first 5 homeowners in the community. So a lot of the things we bought as sort of a wish and then a dream. And what we have seen over the last 5 months, as far as I'm concerned, has been proof in concept. And that is that they've delivered on what they've told us. We anticipate we will move forward with the next phase. And we couldn't be happier living where we are, continuing to enjoy the Eastern Shore lifestyle. And I would encourage you again to consider the facts as they've been presented, and we look forward to your continued monitoring of this and their compliance, but thus far they've exceeded all of our expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hilly Summers and Nancy Jensen. Lynn Semenak.
I don't see her anymore.
David Matrinko.
Don't see him either anymore.
Tammy Holden. Willie Comegys. Marie Doyen at a 50-50 chance.
I'm Marie Doyen, and I live right now in Annapolis, Maryland.
was the first buyer of the new condos. I'm looking forward to moving in March, hopefully, if it's finished. I come and view the buildings about once a week because I love watching the construction, and I can't wait to live here. I've always loved Kent Island and the history and the amenities and everything else, and I've been watching the Four Seasons development here for quite a few years, and I'm very much in favor of it proceeding. Thank you
Thank you.
for your time.
Jonathan Irons? Jana Boyd on deck?
Oops, it's on here.
Oh,
You called my name, I just couldn't get in here fast enough.
okay, you are. Okay. Ms. Holden, please.
Hi, I'm Tammy Holden. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I live in the Cloverfields development on Kimberly, right where it backs up to. I am in favor of the Four Seasons project. I am also a businesswoman, and I have done business with the Four Seasons and their residents. I find them very charming. I am very surprised at what I've seen just in the last 6 months when I went back in there probably 30 days ago. It's a gorgeous development. I believe they've lived up to everything they've said they would. They've been fighting, I believe, since 1999. The roundabout is amazing. I just see they keep coming up against hurdles, and it's to stop the project or to delay the project. Here's how this works. I get that they have rules that they have to abide by. However, they bought this land. When they bought this land, it was no surprise to Queen Anne's County what was going to happen. So for us to stop, continue to have these hearings, continue to prolong, is just utterly ridiculous. They are business people. There's people waiting to move in there. Like they said, there's going to be no kids, no buses. Traffic, that traffic's been a mess since I've lived here. I've lived here since 1997. The bridge traffic, we're going to have to deal with that for a couple years. That's another we must deal with. It has nothing to do with Four Seasons. Their project is not going to add to the mess that we have with traffic. So to bring that up is just, I know they have to do a traffic study, but you cannot throw the bridge traffic in with the Four Seasons traffic. And they did not have to donate the part where they couldn't put the bridge over. They didn't have to donate that, but they did. I understand it's wetlands. They could have kept it for themselves. They just could have just kept it and said, no, I'm keeping it, bottom line. I think they've given a lot. I think they've given a lot of money. And I think that it's time for everyone to understand and maybe stand behind them with the project and let this project move on so people like Miss Jean Judge can move into her forever home. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holden. So, Mr. Jonathan Irons and Jana Boyd and Peyton Emerson on deck.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Irons, and I'm a resident of Queenstown. I enjoy fishing on the Chesapeake Bay, and I am an avid bird watcher and nature photographer. I have identified the highest number of different bird species in Queen Anne's County in the past 2 years. Right now, I'd rather be dressed in camouflage out bird watching, but I felt it was important that I speak up for what is right in our community. I've done some research about the pollutants that contaminate the Chesapeake Bay, and here's what I learned. The Chesapeake Bay program website quotes, "Agriculture is the single largest source of nutrient and sediment pollution entering the Chesapeake Bay." An article from NASA Earth Observatory in 2016 about the Chesapeake Bay stated that farmland is the source of 58% of the sediment pollution that reaches the bay, 58% of the phosphorus, and 42% of the nitrogen. The article also states that buffers can significantly reduce how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment flows into waterways, particularly if the pollution is flowing in surface water. Four Seasons was formerly farmland right up to the water's edge with no wildlife habitat, and pollutants discharged directly into the bay. The Four Seasons property has preserved a 300-foot buffer from Cox Creek and a 150-foot buffer along the Chester River. The critical area requires only 100 feet, and many older waterfront communities don't have any shoreline buffers. Have you visited Four Seasons lately? The buffer is fully regenerated with native vegetation and is ideal habitat for our bird population, both resident and migratory. This buffer is helping prevent any sediment or nutrients from entering the tributaries of the bay. Also, I am grateful to Four Seasons for donating 130 plus acres to the Queen Anne's County for an ecological park. I look forward to using the park for bird watching and bird photography in the future. Hats off to Four Seasons for creating valuable habitat in a growth area and helping preserve the Chesapeake Bay. Thank you.
Jonathan, it takes a lot of guts to come up here as an adult. You were probably one of the most eloquently prepared and deliverable public comments, regardless of the situation, the scenario, and your parents should be proud that they're raising a very valuable member of this community.
Jenna Boyd, Peyton Emerson, Steve Donovan on deck.
Good afternoon. My name is Peyton Emerson. I'm with Rain for Rent. Mike Irons did a really good job explaining what Rain for Rent does with our system that's currently on the Four Seasons project. We're a liquid handling solution provider. I specialize in stormwater. I've been with the company I'm with for 12 years now. Prior to that, I was an environmental consultant specializing in stormwater. The main message I'd like to get across is I do support the project. From my perspective, I've always cared about the environment. I'm an outdoorsman as well, growing up around the Chesapeake Bay. I have never seen in 12 years in this business a contractor take stormwater as seriously as this one does. I mean, we are basically the stormwater pollution prevention plan with regards to stormwater ponds on this project. Since we've started this solution on site, we haven't had any out of compliance water that I'm aware of. So I'd like to see that continue for the life of the project, and I'd like to see other contractors in Maryland take the environmental responsibility as seriously as QACTV. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Steve Donovan. Next up, Steve Layden.
Thank you. Steve Donovan. I live in Centerville, so 237 Burton Air Drive. Up near Centerville is a place called Symphony Village, about 600 some odd homes, fully built out. I have never seen more than 2 cars, ever. Early morning, late night. Never seen more than 2 cars at the stop sign trying to come in or come out of that place. So there's my traffic study for that. Second, it's insane. Second, I want to thank that young man. He was fantastic, and he did a better job than me so far. The numbers that they read out in givebacks to the county, 27 million, I just want to highlight that again, all the things that they've done and changes. We talked about the 131 acres and why it was given back. I'd like to look at the 271 homes they're not profiting on in that. But the 27 million, the water tower, I'm not going to read the whole list. I want to let these residents back here talk. And finally, I want to thank Mike Irons for saying over and over and over, 55 and better. Sure sounds better than 55 and older.
Steve Layden, David Cooper.
Hello, folks. My name is Steve Layden. I work with Macrone. I was the lead engineer on Four Seasons beginning in about 2003. So I've got 16 years experience with the project and the developer. I wanted to basically weigh in on the fact that QACTV puts out a good product. They stand behind their work and they do the right thing. And they're the best example I can think of for that is the stormwater event that happened in the spring of 2017. Mike Irons had referenced that in his testimony. He basically said that there was a significant storm and there was some release of cloudy water from the site, and that resulted in a violation. I think Mr. Falstad might have missed that Mike mentioned that, because Mike said that since that event, there have been no further releases, and that's true, just as Peyton from Rain for Rent just mentioned. But what I wanted to talk about is Four Seasons' response to that event. It was a 5-inch plus rain event. That's a 10-year storm. Sediment controls are designed to contain volume from a 1-inch storm, so it's 5 times what the sediment controls were designed for. So you would expect there to be a release of cloudy water. So their response to that was to have me go back and revise the sediment control plan to enlarge a pond, add a trap, reevaluate the stormwater discharges from all of the ponds, and implement the Rain for Rent system in cooperation with Peyton's designs. And so they voluntarily stopped work during that time while we were modifying the plan. We got it approved from the state. We worked with the state and local authorities. We got all the ducks in the row. Then they started up construction, and since then they haven't discharged a drop of water that hasn't been filtered by the Rain for Rent system. So that's over and above any contractor in Queen Anne's County that I've ever heard of. So I have the greatest respect for them for that. And it's not only in the site improvements. I heard one of the residents moved in and a sidewalk was built per plan next to his house, and he thought it was rather close to the house and asked QACTV, would you move this farther away from my house? And they said sure. They had no reason to do that other than they wanted a happy client. From what I understand from all the clients I've interacted with, they have nothing but the best, highest praise for QACTV. And so I think those two stories basically give you the comfort that the QACTV is doing the right thing and that they're going to make a community that we can all be proud of. And I ask that you allow them to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David Cooper, Chris Tolan, Mike Laney.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Toller. I'm a flooring contractor, and we do the flooring for KHOV out at Four Seasons. I've been a resident of Queen Anne's County for approximately 20 years. I've lived around Chesapeake Bay my entire life. I came to the Eastern Shore because of the fishing and wildlife and hunting and so forth. I've worked in local tackle shops. I tie parachute lures and bucktails that are on a lot of the boats today and are still being pulled around the bay. Got a call a few weeks ago because no one could find 3-inch spoons. I guess they thought I'd keep them in a safe somewhere. But anyway, you know, since the project started, you know, I had to travel across that bridge every day, and I no longer have to do that. Now I work locally. We've brought on installers now that are local. We have field people that work on the project locally, so that helps out. And I just want to come here today and show my support for the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Toller. Mike Laney, Kevin Polacek, Jesse Parks,
Hi, I'm Jesse Parks, 504 Perry's Corner Road in Graysonville. I am the current chairman of the EDC. Just wanted to come before you guys. The EDC, it's kind of been a long-standing project that the EDC has formally supported. So I just kind of wanted to come and reaffirm that support. I am also Senior Vice President of KRM Development in the business park. we have a lot of businesses that have opened there because because of Four Seasons. We have a lot of businesses that will, like Chesapeake Hearing Centers, like Max said, will continue to support the community, and the community will support their businesses and allow them to grow. And then also, I didn't know if you guys were still going to do the text amendment, but
We are, and that'll be a separate conversation if you'd like to do public comment on that.
well, I
at
was
that
just going to
time.
say that we're going to have a separate formal kind of review of that, and then at our next EDC meeting, and then put forth a formal recommendation after that. So, thank you.
Carol Conrad. O.J. Kim.
My name is Carol Conrad, and I live at 107 Ambassador Lane at Four Seasons in Chester, Maryland. I'm here to support Four Seasons. Why did we move to Four Seasons at age 70 to look for an active lifestyle? This is my dream for the rest of my life, my last chapter. Probably I love this here because for the same reasons that the natives live here. I grew up in a small town. I love that lifestyle, and I find here what I value most. I summered on the bay in New Jersey with 30 years of sailing. I lived for 20 years near and sailed on Narragansett Bay and watched that bay go from pollution to alive. It was a great turnaround. I hope to contribute to the Chesapeake Bay. I personally need to be near water, and I love the nature and the sunsets. I'm married to a historian of the American Revolution. I myself was a 40-year teacher of high school history. I value the history of place. I see that here. I am a trained master gardener in Maryland. I hope to be a voice for nature, native plantings. One of the things that really impressed me, one of the first things I saw when I came to the sales, they pulled out the landscape plan, and I sat there and went through the list to see how many natives they were planting. Maybe not every one, but absolutely a huge majority. I care about biodiversity. We have consciously used all local vendors, contractors, hardscape, glass, carpenter, window treatment, hairstylists, new bikes, Club One, the farmer's market. This is a great place to live, and I just am so happy that Four Seasons have given us this opportunity. This place and the people here make me sing with joy. Literally, we have joined a church choir. I hope to become a great contributor to this community. I think I value, and the people that I've met in the community so far, and the standards that Four Seasons sets, is what I value. I value what is here, the people, the place, and the history. Thank you.
Thank you. C.J. Kim, J. Kim. Any other public comment? Something to add that has not been said? Please.
I got inspired a little by the other speakers. My name is Tom Newberger. I am a over 70-year resident of Anne Arundel County, and I am now a prospective buyer in Phase 2 of Four Seasons, if it's approved, which I hope it will be. I want to make 2 points. First of all, I have searched ad nauseum. My wife and I want to downsize into a more suitable home for retirement, and I have searched ad nauseum for 55-plus communities throughout the state of Maryland. I have family roots in Maryland, including family that has property in Queen Anne's County, so I have already spent a lot of time here, and I love it here. But aside from that, I can't find anything out there in the state of Maryland. I can't leave Maryland because my family's here. And I can't find anything out there that comes close to competing with what Four Seasons has to offer. And so I'm very enthusiastic about that opportunity. The other thing I want to simply say is I have a son who's been with Ryan Homes for over 20 years. He's a senior manager. I won't name him, and I won't say where he operates, but when I first visited Four Seasons the first time, I called him. I said, Hovnanian's your competitor. I said, what can you tell me about them? He said, Dad, they build a great product. They build great communities. He said, I have nothing but positive things to say about them. That's a strong competitor saying that. So that speaks very highly. I just wanted to make those two comments. Look forward to moving here.
Thank you very much. Public comment is now closed. Mr. Schultz.
You have to assume.
Minute and a half.
Did that last time.
Mr. Schultz, please.
So Jody Schultz, President, Ken Island Volunteer Fire Department. I'll be short. I just want to acknowledge and thank Four Seasons for their contributions to our fire department. They've been a wonderful, I don't know what I'll call them, a partner, but supporter of our fire department. With the $437,000 that they're going to be contributing, a lot of it's already been, and one thinks that's a lot of money, but we just ordered and are going to place in service next year a new heavy rescue unit, which we probably would have struggled to do if it wasn't for their contributions, and that new unit cost us a little over $1 million. So this equipment's expensive now, and they've been wonderful contributors, and we've adjusted our homeowners association contributions because of the delay. So they kind of stepped up to the plate and made that adjustment for the 10 or 15 years we've lost.
Didn't they go from $7 to $10?
Yes, yeah. Everything he said. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Boone. I'm a project manager for Gaines & Company Incorporated out of Reicherstown. We're the site contractor that was awarded the Phase 1 site development work. We're hoping that we continue on with Phase 2. Several of our main crew leaders reside in the, they call it the shore, but obviously in Goldsboro, Denton, and Chestertown. So several of our employees who are typically been traveling over the bridge for the past decade are very happy to be working in their home home counties, home area. We feel we bring a lot to not to mention the project, but the local businesses, what's dealing with the local resources. The hotels, our guys stay in hotels throughout the week. Obviously our work is over the course of a year, so we feel we're bringing a lot of extra revenue just with the delis, the restaurants, God forbid, but the bars late at night. But it's very important because utilizing the local resources with materials and suppliers and vendors, and it's just, we feel it's a benefit, and it's a big part of our revenue as well. And QACTV, we've been working with them for well over a decade as well, and they're great people to work for, honest pay, and it's just good working relationship. We feel that we've worked with the public works inspectors. I think they're very pleased with the project and the contractors that are chosen, the trades that are chosen. So I couldn't ask for anything better, and I strongly support the approval for Phase 2 and looking forward to continuation of the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Something that has not been said. Please, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Mazzullo. I live.
Can you speak up and into the microphone, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Rebecca Mazzullo. I live in Kent Island. I've lived there my whole life. I'm a sales consultant at Four Seasons, and I'd love to continue to work and live in Queen Anne's County. Thank you.
Last call for public comment. Hearing none, public comment is now closed. Thank you, everyone, for your comments, for and against. I'll open it up to the floor for comment, or the commission.
Mr. Chairman, during the
brief break, I spoke with county engineering staff to sort of further clarify and get some resolution perhaps, or at least clarity and comfort in my previous commentary and concerns over the functionality of some of the submerged gravel wetlands based on sea level rise projections. And I'd like the commission's support behind a motion to have the applicant work with county staff to alleviate some of those concerns. I think that some of us have up here as well as beyond the podium here, with some scenarios, some projections of sea level rise with a storm surge and rain events, that not only are we protecting the downstream resources, right, the public trust of the rivers and the water, but also the success of the project. I'm not at all against the project. I think this is a tremendous support. All of you are very respectfully representative of your community. And my main concern is about the stormwater function, because when salt water inundates a submerged gravel wetland, that submerged gravel wetland dies. It's not as simple as replacing some plants that are inundated. Right, there's microscopic organisms that live in that medium beneath those plants that really do the heavy lifting of the pollution reduction and sequestration. And those are not inexpensive to dig out and replace every time it floods or when we get a significant rain and flood event. So in order to give me the ability to get behind this project fully, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we ask the applicant to meet with County Department of Public Works staff, predominantly Mr. Porter, who apparently is the stormwater voice within that department, to then return to us when that process is over and explain and give more confidence that these required practices, stormwater practices, will function over time based on projected models of sea level rise and stormwater inundation.
So I'm in support of that. Can we, provided that, can we add that as a condition to the final subdivision approval?
How do we see that again?
Well, I think we place that in Mike's hands and make sure that they comply with that. That if they're not complying with it, then it falls back on.
I think we have two things here, just to comment. The project before you complies with the stormwater regs that are in place. The project has been reviewed. We have certain regulatory standards, and the ones critical area, floodplain, zoning, it complies with. And so, this review of sea level rise is above and beyond any type of regulatory requirement that the county would be able to impose.
With all respect, Mr. Kuhn, this board and others similarly assembled, can ask for things above and beyond. We can suggest, changes in architecture that may not follow what's regulatorily, if I just made up a word, required. And I'd also like to suggest that this information, these modeling and projected storm surges and rain events are much more well understood now than they were historically. And I see Trey now comes to the microphone. Don't mean to put you on the spot, Mr. Porter, but I'd like to, my motion stands, and I'll.
Hasn't got a second yet.
Could I just ask for a clarification? Does your motion intend to table the proposal until
Yes, until
this
we
comes
hear,
back?
until my confidence is improved.
I would second the motion.
Now it's on the floor.
Yeah, you didn't second, I don't think formally second it, but go ahead.
Okay, so we now have a motion and a second to formally table pending additional sea level rise documentation and modeling. Is that correct?
Correct. I think we have to discussion
Okay.
with Mr.
Well,
Porter.
it's a little bit more specific than that,
Okay?
isn't it?
I would make
how the design stormwater management system.
How the currently designed submerged gravel wetlands will function under, I don't know, several 1 to 3 scenarios that are used traditionally to predict stormwater, increase in stormwater, right, increase in precipitation events, predicted sea level rise, and or storm surge, so that we can have a better understanding of whether or not those stormwater projects will function over time, based on those.
With that,
Didn't ask that of the library.
Well, the library's only like concept.
Okay.
That was, to Mr. Drummond's point, a countywide study to evaluate how current stormwater management practices may respond to sea level rise is not a project-specific study. I mean, we have submerged gravel wetlands at all different types of elevations in many, many different locations that have been approved by this board and by the county. If it's an informational study to evaluate that, I think that's very different than a project-specific approval.
Go ahead.
Can I add something?
They've invited comment on the motion that's before the floor.
So, Mr. Porter, you as a subject matter expert for the county, we'd welcome your thoughts and opinion.
I am a stormwater management reviewer for Department of Public Works. I reviewed this project. My comment, is this picking up? My comment basically is that we have MIA's maintenance and inspection agreements that do cover basically rebuilding a submerged gravel wetland in the event that it is saturated with salt water, which I would agree would affect the biological growth of the bacteria that's necessary for it to function. However, our recommendation stands just because we do have our recommendation for approval does stand based on the fact that we do have the MIA, we do have inspections and inspectors that can go out and evaluate any type of post-storm damage or storm surge or inundation that occurs. However, we are equipped to evaluate a sea level rise consequence or tailwater condition in the event that the Planning Commission would want further clarification of that. However, again, our recommendation stands that we recommend approval this time.
No, we're done with that.
I'm asking permission. He says no.
No. So we do have a motion on the floor and a second.
Can I weigh in?
Please.
Clearly, the Planning Commission has authority under the zoning code when it comes to site plan approval to be concerned about health, safety, and welfare. That's a broad sort of catch-all standard for discretionary authority. That language does not exist in connection with subdivision approval, though I think we could find any number of examples in either the code or in the comp plan that would more likely than not support concern about subdivision approval along the lines you have proposed. What troubles me, though, a little bit is that you're asking for a study about an unknown and about which there are scientific debates. That is to say, will sea levels rise by 2 feet in 50 years, or 10 feet in 50 years, or no feet in 50 years? How would a project, what would a project, not this one, but any one, do to have reasonable assurance of approval by the Planning Commission when it is being asked to study something about which about something in the future about which there's scientific debate?
Again, respectfully, Mr. Drummond, the debate is.
I've raised this not
Sure.
to have a political argument, but in the context of acting not acting arbitrarily,
Okay.
capriciously or otherwise.
Sure. Well, so there are scenarios that are used to predict and forecast, right, quantitatively, scientifically, sea level rise combined, and then that's one layer, and there's rainfall, precipitation modeling. That's another layer, and then storm surge associated with storm events, weather events, hurricanes, full moons aligned with the stars and the moons and everything else. There are identified ranges, 0 to 2 feet, 2 to 5 feet, 5 to 10 feet over various years. Those are narrower, more narrow, quantifiable potentials for this facility, these stormwater facilities to fail. So I'd like to understand better how often those facilities are forecasted to fail.
Is that a policy matter, or is that a project approval matter?
I don't know how to answer that.
Well, it's very important to answer that because that will define it might define whether the planning commission is acting arbitrarily and capriciously or not.
Well, if hypothetically, if I may, if it comes back that these stormwater management facilities, specifically submerged gravel wetlands, will fail every 5 years, I cannot get behind a project as beautiful and as well supported as it is, because it's irresponsible of us as a governing body, decision-making body, to insult the public good, meaning the rivers, right, the common good that we all own and enjoy. That would be irresponsible of me and this body.
I thought that correct me if I'm wrong, that what has been designed will predictably handle predicted events. Am I right about that?
Stormwater management is designed based on rainfall and certain hydrographs that Maryland Department of the Environment passes on to the counties.
Is this based on some sort of historical data?
It is, yes, but it's
Historical, not anticipatory.
Correct. It's based on rainfall, which is an important distinction to be made between a rainfall storm versus a storm surge versus sea level rise. Very different components, very similar. Flooding may occur, but they could be from different levels. The sea level rise study that was done with the recommendations has 3 different ways of looking at it. It has a 2-year rise by 2050, a 4-year rise by 2100, and then a 2-year rise at 2050 that includes a 2-foot storm surge on top of that. So
Are these designed, is what in these plans designed to handle all that?
No, and stormwater management works independently. Stormwater management review works independently of that, so that is not a consideration. Sea level rise is not, and neither is storm surge. It's independent of stormwater management. Whether it should be or not is a policy decision, but as far as the regulations that we review at Department of Public Works and basically throughout Maryland, as far as I know, stormwater management is isolated to rainfall events.
What happens if what you are saying is not true or doesn't come to fruition? In other words, let's say that we have some unusual rainfall and storm surges and all the things that Tom's talking about. Can your department go back and review and recommend or force Four Seasons to make changes?
That's a legal question. We operate under the regulations that we currently have. Whether or not we can, to answer your question, I would say no. But it's more of a legal question that needs to be.
My guess is that the answer is no until the law changes.
Correct.
Well,
I just want, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, let me just finish,
No, I didn't
Ms.
realize you
Tolliver.
weren't finished.
I have a problem with, we're interjecting something into the equation here that I'm in favor of the project. I think the community, I listen to all the people that are in favor and all the things it's done for Queen Anne County, and it will do for Queen Anne County. And I don't know that it's morally right, I guess is maybe the word I want to use, to hold this thing up for any given period of time to make this study on an unknown. Because that's what it is. It's really an unknown, Tom. I mean, I know you have facts and figures. And that's just my opinion at the moment. So I don't know how to address this thing. I don't know. Well, I'll stop there.
Two things with respect to Bob's point
Before
about.
Sheila gets started, folks, you were asked to be respectful at the beginning. Please let the Planning Commission deliberate without the interruptions.
With respect to Bob's point about projections being impossible, we do projections as a limitation on development all the time. That's why we discussed a traffic study at some length with respect to this. It's a projection of what the traffic will be based on certain assumptions and certain standards. So this is a different context. I mean, it's a different measure, but it's not different in its nature of being a projection. And I think maybe what we need to do, if Tom is agreeable, is put some boundaries. We are calling this a study, which sounds like it's something long-term. I think what I would be satisfied with, but it's your motion, would be to use existing data, existing county approved or federally approved or state approved projections, such as the one we had were briefed on a couple of months ago from the Land Conservancy, which is based on a Queen Anne's County study, and use those as the standards, and then have them model the stormwater management system and produce maps and/or tables showing how it would respond under the assumptions in those studies, not to try to restudy or reproject or develop new standards, because none of us really has the capacity to do that. But there are those projections are available, and I mean, maybe Tom can identify what standards. Maybe that doesn't satisfy what you're after. I don't know, but
Well, first, didn't we just hear that stormwater management and all the calculations that go into it are premised upon rainfall, not upon sea rise or storm surge? So even if you supply that information to the folks that do all the calculations, they won't know what to do with it, because that's not how you calculate an effective stormwater management facility, if I correctly understand what you just said.
We can evaluate a design that shows a tailwater condition, and we can.
What is a tailwater
So that would be
condition?
basically water coming up at the outfall, so that the stormwater doesn't have anywhere to go, and there's a potential for backwater backing up into the system. We can look at that. It's just that, and I think it was discussed earlier, there's no mechanism for us to do that. However, as engineers, it is a hydraulic equation. It is something that you can calculate. But as a stormwater management reviewer, and that's our responsibility, there's no mechanism to add in.
There's no solution in the regulations for that calculation. Is that what you're telling us? We can calculate it. We know that the water will back up this way every 6 months or whatever the heck it is, and it'll create this much backup pressure, and it'll blow out the weir that we saw in there. But there's no regulation that tells us what to do with that information.
Correct, and there's also no regulation that establishes a certain benchmark storm or storm surge or sea level rise upon which the calculation should be based on. So it's sort of a moving target until policy establishes those numbers. The consultants, they can go different directions, but until there's a regulation that establishes the
what's acceptable
what's acceptable and what's not, we can evaluate it, and we can see, okay, well, there could be saltwater intrusion or
So,
whatever.
and with that, Mr. Porter, because those are unknowns that we can't control at this time. There are studies and estimates, but we do have policy, a mitigation plan, that if we do have a backup and an overflow back into a retention plan, we have a mitigation plan to remediate that. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wisnowski, you want to make a
Very,
comment?
very, very quickly, from a, from a planning perspective. In the development community, in the development environment, we all have rules and regulations that we have to abide to. A developer comes in, he has to make sure his stormwater calculations work. He has to make sure he's in the proper zoning district. Many, many, many regulations that are clear-cut, and the playing field is level because we all know what the rules are. My concern from a planning perspective is if we now are going to have this issue come up of sea level rise, I'm not saying it's not important because it is, and we've been studying this for the last 2 years. It's an important issue that has to be addressed. But from a development perspective, when a developer comes in to develop a parcel of land, now from a planning perspective, in the planning department, are we to say to him, well, you meet all the rules and regulations, but you should be aware there may be this issue of sea level rise? To me, that's not fair. We have a set of rules that are established that any developer has to abide by. Zoning, land use, stormwater management, forestation, afforestation, critical area, all these rules. And so I'm uncomfortable now going into the future. How do I appropriately and accurately advise someone that wants to develop in Queen Anne's County to say, oh, by the way, you know, the Planning Commission delayed this project because of sea level rise, where I don't have a basis to require that, because there aren't any rules and regulations established in the state that deals with this. And I'm not discounting sea level rise. I understand it. But there has to be rules and regulations that a developer can rely upon to solve the problem. And we're just not there yet in the state.
This morning when we were talking about the library, we acknowledged that there are no design standards that apply in that district. And yet, we talked a great deal about the design of the library, and we included in our recommendation, in our resolution, a recommendation that they go back and look at the design and make some changes to make it compatible with the community. And I believe it was a unanimous vote to
On
do that.
architecture.
So it seems to me that we could do the same thing here if we had the information available to us, which we don't have. If we find, and maybe we won't, that using standards that other people have already, or projections that other people have already made, if we find that it's likely that this flooding is going to be a problem, doesn't mean we have the right to refuse the project, and I'm not inclined to want to do that anyway. But it does mean that we can make a recommendation about how to accommodate that reality now before it's built, rather than 10 years from now when people are coming into the county and saying, you let them build this big project and I can't get to my house because I have to walk through muddy water.
But I'm concerned about future development in Queen Anne's County.
Well, me too.
And if Mr. Stevens in 2 months brings in a shopping center redevelopment project, and it happens to be on the island, and it's maybe 4 or 5 feet above sea level, is that project not going to go forward because the Planning Commission is going to require them to study sea level rise?
I just said we might make a recommendation. I didn't say we could require anything.
And what are the rules under which they have to apply? That, to me, I'm not discounting sea level rise, but there has to be regulations established so there's a level playing field. And to pick and choose which project you might question sea level rise and which projects you may not question sea level rise, I don't think it's fair.
But this is a project that is in a very environmentally sensitive area. It's bounded by water all around. And it is, by their own description, the largest project in the state of Maryland, maybe, of its type. So it really is different in character from one commercial building on Kent Island that somebody might want to build in terms of the potential impact. I agree with you that we need to have a standard, but I think if somebody doesn't start someplace to find out just what the effects of the things we know are going to happen, we may not know the degree, but we know they're going to happen, somebody needs to make the recommendation to the people who make the laws in this county and in the state so that we have so that we have it. And if we can't examine that in the context of a large environmentally sensitive project, then where does that ever start?
If it's a public policy issue.
Not to put too fine a point on it, these are state standards, by the way.
But, well,
not
the
county
state
standards.
legislature can be responsive to us.
But
They're not obliged to be, but they can be.
But if it's a public policy issue to be evaluated, how sea level rise would be incorporated into development regulations or which zoning districts it would apply to, then it's a planning document that you'd look at it during the time of the planning document being created. So during the update, well,
Of the comprehensive plan, right, which we're planning to do.
And that
would be the time to evaluate whether you're changing policy across the board and not project specific.
Steve, I agree with you. I agree with everything that's been said here, actually, with Ms. Tolliver and Tom Lee, but I think that I just don't see how we can interject this into that situation of approval, especially since this thing has been going on since '04 or whatever it was, and the fact that they have already spent millions of dollars of improvements, a larger percentage than they have actually have built the home sites. I just don't think it's right. I don't see how we can do it legally, quite frankly, to hold this thing up.
So
Let me ask another question. Were there similar submerged, what are these things called?
Submerged gravel wetland.
Submerged gravel wetlands in a 5-foot elevation in Phase 1 that was approved by this planning commission without this discussion? Does anybody know?
We don't have submerged gravel wetlands in Phase 1.
Too bad. I thought that might solve the problem.
We have other, significant other, you saw pictures of them, bioretention, bioswales. Can I offer a compromised approach? I know I'm not, if I'm allowed to speak. Come to the table. Spoke with Trey, Mr. Porter, outside, our engineers did. We looked at our elevations. All our top-level elevations are 6 feet. Excuse me, I don't have the microphone. Mr. Porter looked at, and we discussed that we have easements and agreements with the county that if something failed, we would have to rebuild, so that mechanism's there. There was some discussion about other mechanisms that might be able to be incorporated. Our concern is getting held up, not going back and doing an evaluation and a little more analysis with the Department of Public Works to see if there are things we can incorporate, and maybe even coming back to you and reporting on those. And we have phases 3 and 4, which more than double the size of the community to come back before you. So the compromised approach, and I spoke with Mr. Irons, is that, look, we'll go and make it a condition that we evaluate these things in the coming months, see if we can come to some mitigation provisions that we can incorporate into the plan, but that it doesn't hold up the project. Okay, we'll go back and look at those, but we don't want it to hold up the project. They're ready to move forward and move ground and have done everything under the law, not to mention comply with the DRRA, which freezes the development regulations to 2002. So that's what we like.
Not the state's requirements,
This
which is
is
stormwater management.
right, and we've met stormwater for the state.
I understand.
Right, so I'm not debating that at all.
Don't you have some insofar as possible?
No, we met completely. We didn't do it insofar. It's completely ESD MEP, the site. So that's what we'd ask is a compromised approach, not to do this and hold it up, but we'll go back, and if you allow us to move forward, make it a condition that we evaluate these
You
things.
do agree that in 2002, the holy grail that you guys hang on to, don't change the rules on us. The rules in 2002 also said, particularly in the site plan, that the planning commission may consider the health, safety, and welfare as a site plan criteria, right?
No, I don't disagree with
Health,
that.
safety, and welfare is not frozen in 2002. Health, safety, and welfare might be that which is applicable today.
I could get into a very long debate with you on that, Mr. Drummond, and I'm not going to, okay? Because I'm offering a different approach. I don't necessarily agree.
Okay, well-
But I don't even want to go there. I don't.
You said that we've done everything we're supposed to do, and
Right.
by the way, you're frozen in time in 2002. You said that.
Well, we're not asking for that. We can have that debate if we ever have to. And at
Trying to
the,
help Mr. Lee here. I think, he's got a leg to stand on. I'm not sure I agree with, I think this may be a policy issue, not a project approval issue, as I raised before.
well,
But I'm very sympathetic to what you're trying to do.
okay. And
I am too. I understand that, but I'm looking
Okay,
at the.
so we have a motion on the floor and a second. Is there any more discussion amongst?
Yeah, could I bring something, maybe, in the spirit of trying to work out some sort of compromise between the, between the final subdivision approval and pulling a building permit, there is time in between. So why don't we can proceed with the approval, but not issue the building permit yet until we can rediscuss this and, move forward on that.
Yeah, I don't know if we can approve and not issue a building permit.
In the spirit of trying to find a way of moving forward with this final approval, but yet still not go into construction. Is there anything along those lines that we can do?
I don't see how that, no, it would have to be a condition of approval, which is, I think, what, yeah.
So, as I mentioned, we have a motion and a second.
The motion right now is to table pending, not quite sure what it is, but pending something.
Additional information for sea level rise in the shortened version. So, all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
2? All against the motion? 3? I'm abstaining. 3. It
You're off
doesn't
the
matter.
hook. You don't.
2.5.
So, 2.5, yes. So, that motion has failed. So, now I will entertain any additional motions for final subdivision approval. Now, Mr. Drummond, I do have a question. The way the information was laid out from Mr. Calhoun, it lists a final subdivision approval and then final site plan approval for the condo, buildings, and the clubhouse. Do we have to do all three of those individually, or we may do them all at once?
You do them all at once? It's all one application number, right?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it was all at one application.
Okay, I'll make a motion.
Okay, please, I'll entertain the motion.
I would just make sure you get the numbers that go with each one individually as they're in your staff
So
report
it's-
as far as the number of units and the.
Do I switch this back? Yeah.
How many they're actually approving and they come in.
Okay, be it resolved that the Planning Commission grant final subdivision approval to Keovokian Four Seasons at Ken Island 2 LLC for 179 single-family lots and associated open space lots as Phase 2 of the proposed 1,079 dwelling unit age restricted community as outlined in application number SP 18-09-0014-C with the following conditions, and to include the final site plan approval for a condominium building. Let me back up here. For 70 condominium units and 5 multifamily buildings as Phase 2 of the proposed 1,079 dwelling units, and also to include approval for a condominium building consisting of 26,533 square foot clubhouse building as part of Phase 2. Boy, I really got that messed up. But I'm trying to double read here. Did you get all that down, Sharon? I got it. You got it all down? Okay.
Great in minutes.
Yeah, okay. With the following conditions. I'm sorry. Number one, all legal documents, including off-site easements, must be approved and recorded. Number two, all required sureties, review and inspection must be submitted to the Department of Public Works. Number three, any outstanding minor engineering edits be made to the plan as directed by the Department of Public Works. And number four, all required signatures must be obtained. That's it.
Minor engineering edits.
Do you want to
I thought-
have them work on
And what's the rest of it?
what we were talking about earlier?
Right, that they just made an offer then to review everything, whatever.
Consult with the Department of Public Works regarding the
Okay, the number
function-
5 condition would be to consult
with the Department of Public Works.
with the
to
Department of
assess-
Public Works
assess the
regarding the
functionality-
sea level,
Right.
Assess functionality of stormwater
stormwater management
as a result of
Anticipated
rising sea level or whatever.
But that's, yes, we'll go back and have that evaluation, that discussion, so long as we don't have, it's not a holdup, it's not a condition we have to meet before the plat's assigned.
I've got two good attorneys here today, and I can't get it.
No. As I understand it, that you will consult with the Department of Public Works and its experts and your experts to assess the functionality of the stormwater management system as shown on the subdivision and site plans. Not in light of, but regarding the anticipated sea level rise
And
and storm surges.
Climate change.
And report back to the Planning Commission, but as a
And report back to the planning
yeah, I
commission.
mean, conditions of approval, we generally go down and check off prior to signatures of the plat.
That's
And
not what we're,
Position is to consult.
this is just in the future.
This is correct, as long as it's referenced that way, that the evaluation is done, and we report back to the Planning Commission the findings. And or maybe potential mitigation measures, and
That's right.
Okay.
I would also add, and then revise.
Speak into the microphone, David.
Then also revise the submerged wetlands as needed, whatever comes out of the outcome of this study, then you would move forward and make a revision if a revision is necessary.
We'd agree to implement the reasonable recommendations
Are
of
we
the Department of
complicating
Public
this
Works.
thing?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just,
Yes.
I thought that when the motion didn't pass the first time, I thought that was passé.
I mean, we know we have this issue to evaluate. We got phases 3 and 4 to come up.
I did not originally intend to have this as part of this motion,
And
but I.
we've done everything under the law, and we
They
prefer it not
offered-
to.
Hold a second. Everybody's talking at once, including the audience. The applicant, through its attorney, offered to engage with the Department of Public Works in an analysis of how these systems will work in the event of the anticipated sea level rise, not as a condition of approval or moving forward, but as a study item, to then report to you and not holding them up. I think the telegraph that they should be receiving, Tom, tell me if I'm right, is that when they come back for phases 3 and 4, and this study has produced some scientifically verifiable results, that future stormwater management systems better incorporate some of those recommendations. Am I getting that
That,
about right?
that I would agree with. So make that a part of the motion, if you will, Sharon. Thank you.
It's going to read very well, Bob.
I said scientifically supportable. I know.
Okay, that's
So,
a,
Sharon, for the record, I think the first four conditions, we pretty much understand. Can you clarify and read back in Chris Drummond language, the fifth condition, please?
That's impossible.
Number 5 would be to consult with Department of Public Works to assess the functionality of stormwater management system as shown, I'm guessing
In
today.
the event of storm
We haven't
surge.
gotten there.
No, can I just-
Regarding the
Antici-
anticipated
Sea level rise and storm surges.
And report back to the planning commission.
what we need to do, yeah.
Okay. Everybody understand point 5?
I would like to make, number 6, please.
So, well, we have a.
You wanna- you want a
we have
second
we have a
motion?
motion. I need a second, and then we can do an amendment.
Fair enough.
I have a motion and a second, and Tom, you want to make an amendment?
Yes, please. I'd like to add that the applicant, developer, revisit their landscape planting plans to incorporate native plants throughout the development. Where approved and supervised by our resident landscape architect, Mr. Director, there may be cases where a situation warrants a non-native plant, but I'd like to see the native plants planted throughout the development.
He
So,
means 100%.
Not all. We have some ornamental areas where we want.
so we have a motion, a second, and an amendment.
Caraway trees in native, it's pretty.
On the amendment for discussion before voting upon the amendment, I believe the landscape architect has already talked about sourcing, and that being a problem to meet size and caliber for this particular project.
Hence my comment that the director, at the director's discretion, if, I'd rather see a tree, a non-native tree planted versus no tree. But I'd like all possible, I don't know what the verbiage is, attempts to be made to make this community native to the furthest extent possible. I understand they're already that way in the buffer, but there are choices that have been made in the uplands that are non-native ornamentals.
Shouldn't that be in the landscape
Wait a minute,
ordinance?
the language we'll use for this purpose is insofar as possible. Is that a good enough language for you?
Yeah, correct, yes.
Insofar as possible.
Do I have a second for the amendment?
Second.
I have a second on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
By voice vote.
We have to vote on the amendment?
Just for the amendment first. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
All against? Aye. So the amendment fails. So we have the motion
The second, let's vote
with the
on it.
first 5 and the second. So is there any further discussion? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
So it was passed.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being patient.
We'll give 1 minute to clear the room. Please note, the meeting has not been concluded. We still have additional business, so we would ask those who are leaving to exit quietly. Thank you. Okay.
Did you vote on them?
I voted for the plant one. I agree with you on that one.
There's no habitat value.
in my yard already. Cut it down because it's not native or let it stick?
Bird species don't nest in them, so let's put what's most beneficial in there, especially in critical area.
I was being serious, like,
Yeah.
is it worth getting rid of?
No, it's a personal choice.
See this maple tree in our front yard in Queenstown. That's where we moved now. You gotta go by there.
So you're no longer down on the point?
No, we live in the town of Queenstown now.
Oh, all right. You're actually inside the city limits of the zip code.
We took an old bungalow.
This is a thumb drive.
It was just a crappy little bungalow when we started.
Couldn't rub off
She thought it was loaded on here.
Cute little bungalow. Work with it.
Now, this is what it started as.
Steve, are you done with these?
Yes.
Are you representing?
Amy Mordock, the author of this text amendment, is presenting. If you could just give us one more minute, please.
1 minute.
Where'd she go?
No, she went to get a thumb drive, right?
Amy? Next on the agenda is text amendment 19-17, urban commercial use tenant space exemptions, proposing to identify specific conditions under which the expansion of existing uses of a tenant space in a UC zone may be appropriate. Ms. Murdoch, welcome.
Afternoon. So I intended for this to be an easy item after your last...
Please, you're going to have to pull a microphone and speak
Yeah, I
loudly.
intended for this to be an easier item after your long agenda, but I don't think it's going to be, so. Okay, so what you have before you is a proposed amendment to the county code, to the urban commercial density intensity requirement, and to the supplemental uses and additional uses and regulations sections of the ordinance. I have
Amy, pull that microphone up a little bit closer to you if you can.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure. In your staff report, you have the full language as proposed, and you also have the background as to how this proposed text amendment came to fruition. I can go over that if you'd like me to.
Could you ask them to move down, please? Hold on 1 second.
Let's do that.
Okay, so the county had become aware of the threat of a prominent retail space being vacated in December. And so county staff reached out to the developer of that property, and through dialogue with that developer, opted to take a proactive stance in trying to provide some viable options so that we would not see a vacant and derelict commercial retail space at the gateway to our community. So this amendment is an attempt to provide some flexibility to the code specific to the urban commercial district and specific to existing structures that exceed the current limit. So what we did was we did not intend to open a can of worms that need not be opened, but to address specifically a need to provide for retail space in an existing location. So that is what you see before you. I wanted to put that proposed exception, which is what we're proposing, an expansion of a use and/or tenant space that occupies more than 65,000 square feet of gross floor area in a structure that existed on or before January 6, 2004. Such expansion is limited to 50% of the gross floor area of the use and is subject to supplemental use standards outlined in Chapter 18.1-58O. So that is why you see an amendment to 2 sections. I wanted to put that proposed language in context. Here is the existing standard for urban commercial density intensity requirements. You can see it on the screen. There are currently 16 uses which are exceptions to the 65,000 square foot limit, and Q is the proposal that you have before you. We modeled this proposed language on a text amendment which you saw come to fruition today in the expansion of existing warehouses. So that language is a reflection of a text amendment that has just been approved within the last year to provide consistency in plan review in the ordinance. Also, before you, in any text amendment, you're charged with finding consistency not only with the county code, but also with the comprehensive plan. So I've put before you the goals, principles, and strategies which are specific to increasing opportunities for retail and service through diversification, occupying vacant spaces, and adaptive reuse. So there are many sections of the comprehensive plan which are consistent, and you have them before you, but I wanted to illustrate that there are several strategies. You're also charged with making a finding of consistency with the land use article, which translates to a consistency with the local code. So I put before you the district standards for the urban commercial district. The purpose of that district is intended to provide primarily for a variety of commercial and limited light industrial uses in predominantly urban areas along major highways. Stringent design and landscape standards within the UC district are intended to minimize impacts of commercial uses. That is why the district standards that are proposed in the supplemental uses do include supplemental review standards so that if a project does meet the criteria, that it existed as of the 65,000 plus square foot unit structure existed as of the enactment of the current code, which is January 6, 2004, that expansion be limited to 50%, but also be subject to the town center and urban commercial design standards for commercial and mixed-use development, that they must be implemented insofar as possible. That design guideline document is affiliated with the community plan for the Stevensville community. So with careful attention to consistency with a previous text amendment, to the design standards, the purpose of urban commercial, and the comprehensive plan sections that I've cited, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission review this text amendment favorably.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Ms. Murdoch?
I have three areas of concern. I guess the first area of concern, and I asked Ms. Murdoch a background question, which I think was copied to you, relates to the singularity of this project. According to Ms. Murdoch, there is no other property in the county that meets the criteria for this change. And I do know that spot zoning, which this would be, is frowned upon at best and illegal at worst. I have a copy, for example, of a case in Maryland, the Huff versus the Board of Zoning Appeals that was in the Court of Appeals of Maryland, and it says, when a zoning ordinance, this is the pertinent part, where amendment puts a small area in a zone different from that of the surrounding area, we have what may be called spot zoning, using the term in a descriptive sense. Such zoning may be invalid or valid. It is arbitrary and unreasonable devotion of the small area to a use inconsistent with the uses to the rest of the district is restricted and made. It is arbitrary and unreasonable to devote a small area to a use inconsistent with the uses of the rest of the district, to which the rest of the district is restricted, and made for the sole benefit of the private interest of the owner. That would render it invalid. I'm wondering what it is about this particular project that makes it not vulnerable to a charge of spot zoning and possibly an invalid spot zoning.
I can start to respond, and I'll let Mr. Drummond chime in where I might fall and need some legal backup. Spot zoning is specific to changing the zoning of a property and is not specific to proposed uses of a property. So we're not proposing to singularly change a property that had heretofore been a different zone. What we're doing specifically is within the context of the standing exceptions that are articulated in 18-1-22D, 3 specifically, where there are 16 exceptions to the limitation of the 65,000 square foot gross floor area. We are adding another standard to that list to provide for flexibility that we feel is consistent with that zoning district, but also consistent with the comprehensive plan.
The literature
That is consistent with my legal advice to the department.
The literature does
zoning.
reflect, however, that an amendment to the use is
No,
actually, can be
that's not what you
construed
said. You said that's a zoning district change.
I misspoke, unless you're talking about the part I read.
What's the name of the case?
Pardon me?
What's the name of the case?
The case I read was Huff versus the Board of Zoning
Can hear
Appeals,
that.
Court of Appeals of Maryland.
Huff?
Yes,
I'm not familiar with that one.
I have a copy of the pertinent piece of it. I didn't cover it.
If you are concerned that this is the so-called red-headed Eskimo bill, it absolutely is.
Thank you.
It is
I
absolutely.
think that should be a part of the record and I think it should be part of our consideration.
Well, there's been we're totally transparent about that. No
Okay.
one's hiding that.
Well,
Everybody knows
There
what
was
this is
nothing
for.
in the staff
We're
report.
trying to fill a void, an anticipated dark center that it happens to be a big box retailer. And so in our discussions with Mr. Cordish, who owns the property.
And so it's clear, I understand that planning and zoning, these two staff members are fronting for this. They didn't start this. However, they've been asked to front for it, so it's clear about that.
I'm not personalizing this or
The
placing any
people-
blame
That's
at all.
beside the point.
The people that started this aren't sitting here right now.
That's okay. No, that's just beside the point. But from a planning perspective, it makes absolute sense to do whatever we can within reason and good planning to try to make that building, that site, attractive to the development community. We have a long history of vacant uses along 50, and it hurts our economic development, it hurts our growth, and it's unsightly. And so the goal, the vision, is to massage the existing standards to make it more attractive to a developer that will quickly come in and make that use viable. And I think the safeguard in that is we're going to require good architecture, good land planning, good landscaping to infuse life back into that rather worn center. And that's really the goal. And it's just a larger version of what we did with Chester Storage last year, where we allowed that use to expand in that zone by 50%.
And if a cost is a Target or a Walmart, and you're not willing to accept that, then you don't recommend it. But that is the cost.
I'm not here to evaluate a specific store.
We all know what this is about.
But let me clarify. It could be any retailer that needs that amount of space. It could be from a Wegmans to a Dick's Sporting Goods to a Walmart. I mean, everybody keeps clamoring about two uses. They may be the most popular, and they may be what we've heard, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be some other major retailer that needs that much space. And that's what we're trying to make it attractive.
That is a cost of this amendment.
I'm sorry?
To get that particular site economically viable and revitalated.
And that doesn't mean that a retailer would not come in and maybe take half the space and redevelop the property. I mean, it just gives him more options, that's all. We're trying to create as many options as we can so that that building doesn't stay dark for a decade.
Well, the way the code is written now, it probably has prohibited.
It's non-conforming.
It's non-conforming.
And if it goes dark for more than a year, then its legal nonconformity expires.
Right.
And then we may not be able to refill it. Not by we, I don't mean.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's probably why we haven't had any big box stores to even infiltrate the area. Probably is because of the coding. Is this?
That code requirement, yes, limits.
It's very restrictive, really.
Yes. And we're not trying to, one of the suggestions was to make it all in the UC, and we're not doing that. We're being site-specific to this property.
How many other
65,000 square foot was picked back in the day.
I'm sorry?
The 65,000 square foot limitation was picked back in the day, and I've forgotten what year it was, because it was believed that there were some grocery stores that would be in the 60,000 square foot vicinity, and the grocery stores, there was no one wanted to prohibit grocery stores. That's why 65,000 was picked.
And that was done by referendum of the public, was it not?
I believe that there has.
Yes, it was by referendum.
And that's my second concern, that we are administratively recommending a change, which would be adopted legislatively, that would overturn the public, not just a law, but the public's will, at least at a given time, at the time that it was adopted. And my third concern is with the clarity of the language itself. And I was concerned about the 50% increase of what, because it says use and/or tenant space. And I understand that the current store has 115,000 square feet, of which 65,000 is occupied by a tenant. What's the rest of it?
That's not right.
That's the entire strip.
That's what Mr. Moordock sent me.
I think
have
to
that here.
answer your question.
95,000.
It's 95,000
95.
square feet,
It's
so it would be an addition of 47,500.
It's 95,000, the gross
Yes.
square footage in the building, or the
No,
tenant?
Kmart.
The tenant space. This language is specific to tenant space, the gross floor area of that use, of that tenant space, of that use.
So what you're talking about is a finished product of 142,500 square feet.
Possible.
Yeah. Which also leads me to a question too. Can that site accommodate that much more square footage, given
Well,
the...
that's a very
the-
good question.
The future roads that are
Right.
planned there, and the
Right.
wetlands, and everything else?
And that would be evaluated as part of any site plan.
Well, you have to come before us.
Right, that's
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
And so we don't know. That's a very good question.
Because I want, it's going to be tight.
One of the things, well, there's property around that Kmart that's not used. There's a pad site that's grass, as an example, that, but you're right, that was one of the first questions that I had in my mind. Could that center accommodate that much square footage? Well, we'll evaluate that as part of a site plan application that would come before
But
this
there's some
commission.
future roads right there,
Right.
too.
But let's
that's-
start with the opportunity. That's what we're trying to do.
And that's where the comprehensive plan and those design standards that are proposed to be required to be adhered to insofar as possible all come into play. We started with this language because it's consistent with the ordinance as it stands. It's a viable proposal for your review that provides you a consistent jumping off point for this dialogue. That 50%, a precedent has been set with the mini storage facility text amendment. I looked and I had the same concerns that you do. What would an expansion of this type of use look like? How imposing might it be? It would really need to come with some pretty stringent progressive design standards to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and that's when I spent a good amount of time with the design standard document that was adopted in 2008, and it's quite good. The design standards are quite comprehensive, and I was thinking along the lines of making recommendations for your consideration that are already in existence, which is why I referenced this plan specifically in this proposed ordinance, so that it's very clear, should an applicant come forward, if this text amendment does move forward in some form or fashion, that there are very stringent design standards that would guide how any expansion would look. And since we know we're talking specifically about that site, we would also be looking at, through the comp plan, infrastructure upgrades and improvements, so that what is there is in effect a big box store, and our only one.
How many square feet is there now?
Kmart store is 95,000 square feet. The total footprint of the shopping plaza is 115,000.
So that's where I was trying to find out where David got his 142,000. Now I understand.
So the existing Kmart space could be
50% of it.
enlarged to 142,500.
Yeah.
Potentially. I
Potentially.
keep saying potentially
There are-
because in our conversations, and just knowing the market, there's probably not a retailer that needs that much space.
I think most of the Kmart stores, a Walmart, and Target are in the 95,000 square
Okay,
foot.
the average, I just looked it up, the average,
did
like
too.
Sam's Club store is 134,000.
I was going to say 120 is pretty much it.
105 is the average for Walmart, and 105, and then 135 for Target.
But we didn't want to try to create another set of standards. We wanted to use the language that was previously adopted last year, so there's consistency in the code. That's how and why we
Well,
picked
from
the
an economic
50%.
development point of view and the tax structure, I would think that we need that participation by.
Yes, I agree. It's our front door. We want to be as receptive as we can for the economic development in the county. We have this box. It's not like it's a vacant piece of ground and we're creating a big box. We just want to fill the box. And we want to make it attractive so someone will come in. I think it's a great site, by the way. You come right over the bridge, bam, you're there. It has access. It's a wonderful site. I think it would be very attractive.
It'll handle the traffic too. It's an ideal location.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
And we are contemplative of the referendum, and a text amendment is a public and viable process. It is not dismissive of the referendum. Had we put forward something else that would open up for new development, or had tried to span multiple districts, then yes, I would have the same agita that you've expressed. But
Why didn't you just include the potential for example for grandfathering in the existing space, which would exceed the 65,000 square foot limit that now exists, instead of grandfathering that in and allowing a 50% expansion?
Not as if we didn't consider it.
Well, why did you decide on the 50%
I think
expansion?
we're aware
Is
that-
there a particular tenant that is
No.
contemplating this site?
No.
Well, then why, I'm just curious why you,
Because
Same
I
market
think we're
research that we
aware
just discussed.
We're aware that, much like grocery stores aren't 25 to 30,000 square feet nowadays, except for Aldi's, they tend to be 50,000 square feet. These large retail spaces aren't under 100,000 square feet anymore, and they're certainly not under 65,000 square feet. And you could say that you can't raise it more than 10%, or 25%, or 100%. We just picked 50, because that was the same as the mini warehouse.
to go back to my question that I started with about use and/or tenant space, can you, since the language that you're proposing uses the use and/or tenant space, and you're saying that, what's the difference?
That's the existing language. That's not new language. That language exists.
What's the difference? So
That-
how
that's
would
the-
I know that if the use of the 95,000 square feet is for urban commercial retail, and Kmart is a tenant using 65,000 square feet of that space, how would I know whether to use the 95,000 or the 65,000 square feet? I don't understand.
Okay, well, let's back up a bit. This language is exactly the language that created the 65,000 square foot limit.
Okay, so I'm still trying to understand what it
And-
means.
And I thankfully,
And to
I
see
didn't
if it's
write it.
clear.
So I didn't write it back when it was written at 65,000 square feet.
Okay.
So now we're going to be asked to parse the language that was created some 10 years
No,
ago.
we're asked to adopt this language.
No, no.
Even if it exists someplace else, we don't write in Old English anymore, even though it's there.
Okay.
So I just want to understand what's being proposed. And if use and tenant space are different, which they must be because it says or, what is the difference?
It could be that,
And if we're deciding what 50% is, how do we know which one to, which one to?
I think the
Kmart,
answer-
let's say Kmart built and owned the 95,000 square feet, then it wouldn't be tenant space, it would be a use. Now, we happen to know that Kmart's a tenant,
Right.
but I don't know if Target builds its own buildings and occupies them, I don't know.
But we're using that language for expansion.
I think this might help you a bit, Sheila, if we say basically, the gross floor area of the tenant space which existed of January 6, 2004, because that establishes what the specific square footage was ahead of time, and then how much it can be increased.
That's okay, but then they would only be increasing the 65,000 square feet, wouldn't they?
Right, but the 65,000 square feet, I believe, existed in January 2004. So,
It's what existed that is more than 65,000 square feet of gross floor area. So there isn't a question as to what number we're talking about. Say, if we're talking about the Kmart, and we know that that use, that tenant space, that the gross floor area is 95,000 square feet, that does not include the entire use of that Kmart facility. That Kmart also has an outdoor area that was a garden center. That outdoor area is not subject to additional expansion.
Is that part of the 95,000 square feet?
It is not.
Doesn't count as floor area.
It is not a
Didn't have a
floor
roof.
area.
doesn't have a roof.
So,
Correct.
so that's kind of immaterial.
No, that's the answer.
Right, but getting back to what I said though too, if you don't specify as of a certain time, there are other like vacant spaces within that overall building.
Right.
You could, enlarge the 65,000 square feet to a larger space and then do 50% of that again. So somehow you have to tie it in where you're basically limiting to how much you can expand. So you
That's
have
what
to do the 65,000 square feet as of a certain day.
I'm okay with that, except that I think it doesn't give you the square feet that you're talking about wanting to accomplish.
Well, it does,
Okay,
because
well, hold on. I think we're completely talking at cross purposes
Maybe
here,
so.
because it may be that, I think, we're not understanding what you're advocating.
I'm not
And-
advocating,
No, no,
I'm
no, no.
asking.
Okay, I won't use the word advocating. We're not understanding what questions you're raising,
Okay.
and I don't think you're understanding what Amy's trying to explain. So
Right.
maybe if you could write down how
We
you
are-
think it should be written.
I don't care which way we go. We are I think, well, if we are adopting this language, I don't care which way we go. But if we are, but I think it needs to be clear, because we're saying you can expand it, the gross floor area by 50%
Yes?
of the use, okay, of the use.
Space
Or
that is
10.
occupied.
So it's not the 65,000 square feet, because that's the tenant's occupancy.
That's the minimum.
It's 50%
50% of that
the
number.
use that is
Right.
greater than 65,000. Or in this case, it happens to be one that we are aware of. It's 95,000. So it's half of 95, as you've pointed out, is 47.5, I think, offhand.
That number is definable. It's definable through assessment records, it's definable through the floor plan, and it would exclude and discount any areas that are used by a tenant that are not a part of that gross floor area. So as I mentioned in the garden center area, that area would not be subject to expansion under this provision. It's simply the structure itself.
I understood that.
But in all likelihood, if this language were adopted as presented, and if an applicant did not come forward within 1 year, then it is likely that that outdoor area would be lost in terms of the area of use, because it is not subject to this specific language. So the language would carry forward and only apply to that tenant space, that use that is calculatable through the gross floor area.
But you've already identified that outdoor space is not part of their gross floor area, so
Correct.
it doesn't matter anyway.
Correct, but if you're
was the
looking
point
for
I
the
was making
distinction between what number we're using and what would be excluded, that's what I'm trying to answer for you, so that that's how I interpret this language.
I was distinguishing between the 65,000 square feet and the 95,000 square feet, not the tent.
Okay, I don't understand your question then.
Let me ask you a question. How would this relate, Mike, to the Wheatland Farms? If
It doesn't.
It's
They're
not.
they're in
They're a
a,
municipality.
they're a municipality. They're part of Queenstown
They're-
proper.
they're
This
not
language
subject to this
only
land.
impacts the Kmart Center,
it
period.
only impacts that one location, no other urban commercial.
But the
We
point-
did that analysis.
Because there aren't any other uses or tenant spaces greater than 65,000 square feet. There's
Well, that
only
answers,
one.
I might
Correct,
answer
correct,
part of her question.
correct.
Spot.
Huh?
That's one of the reasons it's not spot zoning. Because
Live
there just
zoning?
happens to only exist to be one.
It's not zoning.
Right, well, that too. But it's only one instance.
That answers part of your question, doesn't it?
Admittedly, that's
No,
what
I
we're doing.
understood that part.
For this one site,
For one site.
for one site, that's right.
I understand there's been some emailing and/or social messaging about the planning staff not trying to pull a fast one. And that is not what's going on here. This is as transparent as it can be.
I haven't seen that email.
I haven't seen any that's been reported to me.
I want a
That's
big
fake
box.
news.
I want that big box.
Public, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Murdock or Mr. Wisnowski? Hearing none, we'll reserve the right to question you later. We will open it up to public comment, please.
I promise I'll be quick.
Please.
Put you on the Jody Schultz schedule, minute and a half. Joking. You have 3 minutes.
Jay Falstad, Queen Anne's Conservation Association. I don't want my comments to come across as saber rattling. They're not. Queen Anne's Conservation has not taken a position on this matter yet, and I'm not sure that we will. But I was involved in a limited way in the last referendum, and so that's the only reason that I'm speaking on this now. But this has been an extraordinary discussion, and I'll tell you why. Because in the last hearing on Four Seasons, we were operating on, or at least it was raised on what ifs. What if this happened? What if that happened? And you all were directed to say that we can't operate on what ifs. Here we are now, and we've got a building, and the staff and you all are saying, well, what if we can't fill it? That's not your problem. That's Mr. Cordish's problem. And I don't know why we're bending over backwards, because at the end of the day, this really is spot zoning when it gets right down to it. And then just very lastly, the county just hired a very capable, exceptional economic development director in Heather Corsi. We haven't given her the opportunity to go out and see what she can find for this building. It may be that there's somebody out there that is interested in this building as it is, and it can be modified. But I think this board ought to take a little bit of caution before making these changes. Otherwise, it could find itself in a bind. It may not seem like that's the case, but I think it could. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we'll have, if we take Mr. Falstad's false equivalencies, we will have the same situation that we have with Acme, which is a brewery inside a grocery store. It looks, well, I won't characterize how it looks, but you can draw your own conclusions. This suggestion will not end up with a brewery inside what looks like a grocery store.
So I know we had one other public comment that was signed up. That would be Ms. Bennett.
I'd say this when I got here at 8:45. Good evening. It's been a long day. I mirror a lot of what Jay was just saying. I so appreciated Ms. Tolliver talking about the spot, and I'm sorry, it's Helen Bennett, Ken Island resident, EDC fifth year member, and citizen advocate, if I might self-appoint myself. But it's funny, yes, I wrote that down, that we were talking about these projections and this dark for a decade, like, wow, it's not even empty yet, and it's been dark for a decade. And I happen to be a fan of Cult Classic. I go there frequently with friends who this is their second home, and they've invested a lot of money to try to bring a restaurant to them. So I would, it's subjective. But when I asked Planning and Zoning if this text amendment, when I first saw it, and it was not mentioned at our last EDC meeting, which is interesting, I said, is this anything to do with just trying to fill the Kmart with the big box store? And I got a one-word answer back, yes. And that was disconcerting, but that wasn't my comments. I have two comments, two fronts. I know no one wants an empty storefront, but does that mean we stick the first, easiest, most obvious thing that comes to mind? The Acme may have been vacant a little too long, but Cult Classic was a thoughtful infill. With all the collective years of experience, wisdom, and creativity between the planning staff and the economic development team, I believe we can come up with unique options worthy of, in the words of one of our planning and zoning staff, the gateway to the shore. I suggest we let Ms. Tonelli, Jean Faby, and the economic team work with the building reps towards a solution that is actually supported by the comp plan and respect the vote of the people without a rush to infill. My second set of comments, empty storefronts aside, is there are plenty of points I would like to talk to in depth as to why this is a bad idea, but I won't. I'll do it briefly. Big box receipts are sent out of state. They're not poured back into the community. Big box arguably results in a net loss of jobs due to the fact that there's less employees per square foot. Again, arguably, they say big box brings great revenue increases, yet that doesn't seem to materialize necessarily into measurable additions or improvements to citizen services. The decrease of small business, it does go down, and they're the ones who actually support your community. If you've ever been to a fundraiser and have a feeling as a Planning and Zoning Commission, you have been to fundraisers, you do not see Target gift cards unless someone bought one. You don't see Chewy gift cards. You don't see Amazon. You see baskets that were donated by your small business. They support your community. And the increase in square footage and the stormwater management modifications will result in reconstruction of that area right off the bridge at a time when our traffic is already untenable. And it destroys the character of Kent Island. But I'm not going to talk in depth. The only reason that really matters is that we, the people, voted against it in 2012. I was one of those people. A lot of good, hardworking people spent a considerable amount of time and effort successfully fighting this 8 years ago. And without another vote, that should have settled it. Yet here we are again. And this current text amendment, designed to ultimately negate our vote, masquerading as a single exception in the UC district, is still against the voters. It was stated in a well-written article when this issue first came up in 2011, quote, 3 commissioners are accused of muscling through the legislation in the face of loud opposition from conservation groups and residents in favor of business interests, end quote. And it seems that that's happening again. At just this last commission meeting, we had a commissioner that said, we need a target. This text amendment hadn't even come up to you yet, and they're already advocating it at the commissioner level. This commission submitted a negative recommendation to the commissioners in 2011. I ask you to vote the same way today, just as the voters did in 2012. Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Just a question about the Economic Development Committee.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume that if the big box person was going to come, they'd probably be looking for some sort of economic development package or something from the county. Is that something that you guys are going to discuss and come up with some solution?
We usually discuss all of that when someone comes before us. I think whenever a text amendment comes in, more than just even the developer, we just look at pros and cons and maybe unintended consequences and things like that. But yeah, we certainly, especially with Gene Faby, very good about talking about the packages that we have available for new business, old business, enterprise zone, all that type of thing, yes. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you're liable then to discuss it and offer something then to a potential future retailer then that would come there.
Yes, we do try to do that, but when we first look at text amendments, which is kind of funny because we didn't look at this one before it came to you, normally we kind of look at the text amendments and then Jesse or Jean will present a recommendation to you what the EDC thought, but it hasn't come to us yet. We won't have that until next week, but. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Well, let's be, there's been a rather irregular, I'm using that, irregular channels in the manner in which this has appeared. That the EDC, to suggest that the EDC, not Ms. Bennett, I'm not saying that, but that there aren't elements of the EDC that aren't aware of this text amendment would be untrue.
Are we allowed to know what these irregular channels are?
Well,
Or are
I
we
will
just supposed
say,
to
I mean,
guess?
let's say I have put out a video, but I have a Facebook page called Helen Bennett for QAC, and it's been viewed over 1,300 times since I put it up last week, which I think, I'm waiting for my endorsements. No, I'm teasing. But it's just, I put information out there because that's, I think, why we have citizens commissions, is because we're citizens looking for input from citizens. And so I don't know if that, I do not know if that's your regular channels. I don't.
No, I'm not
But,
talking about
okay,
your
because I just, but I wanted to be upfront. Yes,
I
I
meant
put.
the impetus of
yeah.
the proposal.
I'm trying to keep, I know that these two have been taking some flack.
Well, usually that comes in the form of our staff report, where it came from, and it's not in this one, so I,
Say it's,
We ca-
there's some
we can
people
make some
want cover and
assumptions.
other people's don't.
I did call the planning and zoning as well. I like to find out when a text amendment is first introduced and I hear about it, I find that if I can ask who asked you to write it, And when was it put? I just think that gives me a lot of information. And that's important to know because, you know, you'd like to think that everybody wants the best for everyone. It just doesn't always happen that way. So if I can find out who introduced a text amendment and maybe why and get some background, it just gives me a fuller picture, which I think I need as a very involved citizen to help me make a decision, especially as I'm sharing information, because I want to be fair to everybody. I really do. Yeah.
There are some limits on who can just recommend a text amendment out of schedule.
I have to say, even though I asked, I did not find out who, so
Okay.
it's a moot point.
Neither
Thank
did-
you very
neither
much.
did
Anything
I.
else? Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Most Honorable Commissioner?
Good afternoon. So apparently, Jim Moran, County Commissioner from Queenstown. First off, I don't know what all the hubbub is about where this came from. The Kmart's leaving. Mr. Cordish actually contacted Gene Faby first, right, Gene?
I contacted Jim.
There you go. And then Mr. Cordish had a conversation with the County Administrator, Todd Mon, said he'd like to come in and speak to us about the Kmart. And I think that they were there. I was there. And he asked the question about, you know, what do we want to do with this building? And when we said, what are our options? What can we do? That's why this is in front of you now. So I personally think that 200 jobs is important. I personally think that our citizens that live down Route 8 and on Kent Island shouldn't have to go to Annapolis or to Easton to shop. So, you know, if this allows more flexibility for something to get into that store, so again, I mean, I think that what's been out on Facebook, some of it isn't the truth, some of it is, but some of the responses are telling people are tired of having to travel to Easton or to Annapolis to shop. They want to stay here, and especially with the traffic. So, you know, this is something that I don't have a problem saying I support this 100%. So, you know, if there's questions and you want to ask me, feel free, but keep in mind, and I don't think Steve Cahoon, the access road. There's an access road we're trying to get built. It's actually built now, but it stops behind Kmart that cuts over from Route 8 so people don't have to go up to the bridge, the overpass, and get onto to the shopping center. There's a back access road, and so we're trying to massage those channels to hopefully get that right away put in there so that we can connect Route 8 with the shopping center from the backside, not going around through where all the traffic is. So all this is in play with this, and if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
I'd like to thank you for being candid, one. Thank you, two, for trying to use the resources of the county to promote getting a new business in there, which is not to say that I necessarily will agree with the expansion piece of this proposal.
Understand.
But I do appreciate that the county doesn't want a lot of vacant space, and we have a lot of vacant space.
We don't want another Kent Narrows. I mean, you know, Jamal,
We have a nice proposal for Kent Narrows.
well, he's pulled the plug on that. We had a nice proposal, so.
Oh, is it gone now?
Yeah, it's gone,
Oh, I
so.
didn't know that.
And I think Mears is gone too, so, you know, unfortunately,
I
you
knew
know,
Mears
both
was-
those projects are now gone by the
Oh, I
wayside.
support. Well,
So,
that's too
you know,
bad.
and to the answer to the, you know, the small business portion of it, I mean, I'm a small business owner, and I don't look for handouts. I don't look for help. I'd rather have government just stay out of my way. And with that being said, I mean, I can't tell you how many big boxes are in Easton, and they have half the population that we have. I mean, I don't think their small businesses are going out of business. I mean, Caroline County has a fourth the population that we have, and they have big boxes. So, you know, it seems like everybody else can have one and draw shoppers there in employment. And again, you know, anything that goes in there is probably around 200 jobs, and that's I think vital for Queen Anne's County. So.
It's my understanding, and I don't hold me to this because I don't have any privileged information, but you ask about Waterman's property, Wheatland Farms, and that's in a municipality, so it doesn't have the 65,000 square foot limit. My understanding is they haven't found any interest in big boxes and locating there.
That's probably true. I don't know anything about it. I mean, I will say that they
Last plan I
had.
looked at was mostly residential, that
Well,
big boxes feel that there's not enough population here to support them, given that there are big boxes within 20 miles on either side, less than
I
that
agree.
from Ken Island.
I agree. I don't disagree with
So
that. I
I'm
will
not
say
sure
you
the
though.
market is there. We're creating a space for which there may be no market.
Correct. Well, we're not creating, we're creating an option. We're
We're
creating an option, which you're right, if there's no market, it goes by the wayside and it's over in a year anyways. So I don't think I don't think there's any harm or any foul to that. So, for instance, if nobody comes in within a year, it reverts back, correct? If a vote is given to it to add the 50,000 or 50%?
No, it stays in the law until we change
If we
it.
do not change the code as it is now.
Right.
The Kmart building, or that portion, well, let's back up. The Kmart space would be non-conforming and would have to remain, it wouldn't have to remain dark. It would have to be split up into spaces smaller than 65,000 square feet.
Right. Okay.
And that's possible, that
Right.
they could cut it up and
That's
put
right.
in small retailers, sure.
Anything else for me? Thank you very much. It's been a long day. I appreciate your service.
Thank you, Jim.
But with that, with this amendment, if it's passed, in 1 year, if they have not done anything, then the zoning regulations say that it reverts or remains
Wait a minute,
it becomes a non-conforming
Let
use.
me just think that through. I don't want to be,
That's what I heard you say.
I have to think that one through. If Kmart closes and this passes, let's say as is, and it takes 2 years to find someone to take advantage of this, I'm not so sure. That's a good question. I have to think that through now.
Hoping it
Because it
doesn't
says
take 2 years.
occupies, it's sort of present tense.
Where did that wording come from? I've heard it a couple of times mentioned here.
It's in the ordinance now.
It's in the ordinance now?
So that's a very good question that I'm going to have to think about. I don't want to say something that's just shooting from the hip.
The urban commercial district has specific density and intensity requirements. And one of those requirements is specific to individual use and/or tenant space in a structure shall occupy more than 65, no individual space shall occupy more than 65,000 square feet of gross floor area, except for the following uses, and there are standing 16 uses. So we did not change that language at all. And I just want to clarify staff's role. I've been planning staff for a long, long time. And staff often introduces zoning text amendments through a wide range of channels. Sometimes when you just process the zoning text amendment for the cargo containers, that was a problem that was identified by the zoning administrator. And so we collaborated and moved that through. There is also an issue with food trucks, which you will be seeing again before the season starts. We've gotten sidetracked, namely with the comprehensive plan that I'll update you on, and some other items. But that is also a staff-generated amendment. So when we see problems, whether they are brought up by the zoning interpretation and enactment, or by economic development, or by conversation on the street because we know something is happening, one of our jobs is to be proactive and to try to find a way to serve the community within the confines of the code. So the fact that an issue arose as to where this staff report originated was odd, and it was also answered very honestly. when I was asked, and that was that it came from county staff, which is the truth. It's just we're the staff that has to draft it, make sure it's compliant, and bring it before you to work with you to make it work or not work. So I wanted to clarify that this is not unusual at all. This happens all the time.
Right.
I understand. I was trying to help you guys, because I know you've been taking some unfair shots from certain individuals that I just think it's important that you are following some directions given by other county staff.
So are there any other questions for staff? So at this time, I will entertain a motion for recommendation to the county commissioners. All right, I'll make the motion. I hereby, Queen Anne County Planning Commission makes a favorable recommendation to the county commissioners that based on the consistency with the applicable laws noted above, as by the staff report dated 14 November 2019, prepared by Amy Moordock, Principal Planner, and Rob Gunther, Development Review Principal Planner, send a favorable recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners for text amendment County Ordinance 19-17 to modify Chapter 18 as outlined above. Specifically, the recommendations of the Planning Commission shall include the discussion of matters required to be considered by the County Commissioners. Therefore, we offer the following findings. The land use article and the proposed amendment is consistent with the purpose of the UC district in that the standards for expansion are definitive and require adherence to the town center and urban commercial design standards, the commercial and mixed-use development standards. These standards were adopted by resolution in June of 2008 and more specifically address the conformance with the Chester/Stevensville Community Plan adopted on May 1st, 2007. That the plan is also consistent with the comprehensive plan with many of the goals and principles and strategies identified within that plan. Specifically, the proposal is consistent with the goal of increasing opportunities for retail and service through diversification and occupying vacant spaces and adaptive reuse of obsolete buildings.
Second.
I have a second on the motion. Is there any further discussion?
I'd like to ask our counsel if he's had time to think through your question and whether or not caution is warranted on his advice.
Still don't have an answer.
That gives me pause, that's all.
But you have a year to fix it.
Well, and this is purely an opportunity, that if someone wants to come in, there provides an opportunity for that to happen. If within 1 year something doesn't happen, maybe it needs to be revisited and it reverts, or the non-conforming use has to be addressed. But this provides an opportunity at this time.
So that we're back to the same place whether we pass it or not, is what you're suggesting.
Just making a statement.
This is an option.
All right, let me. All right, when legal counsel needs to think about it, and I fully appreciate and respect Mr. Drummond's research and historical knowledge of these situations, it's just when they can't answer it.
Understood. I respect.
I want to slow down. Because I'd be in favor of it if we don't pass it and it reverts back to nonconformity, right? That's one outcome. If we pass this and it goes right back to that, then what's the harm? Other than we could get occupancy in there.
Other than that, they'll come back again and ask us to extend the time frame or something.
What's the harm if it becomes permanent?
becomes
I'd
permanent.
like to know that.
I'd like to know that too. What is it? Nothing.
There isn't any.
only
It's an
applies to
adaptive
this one
reuse of an existing property.
It's just giving
within a
more
tenant.
opportunity, that's all. I mean,
To fulfill a vacant space. It's an adaptive reuse that, as a planner, we should all be excited about versus having a blank building.
Look, my head's spinning from all this wordsmithing.
Somebody
That's
come
all.
back and use it at current size.
Been
They
through
have this
mental
option
Olympics all
because-
day.
I learned my lesson not to say the table word again today.
Could you put up the amendment again, please? Put in there somewhere that it has to be the same use.
Let me show you the context, because
No,
there,
in the amendment, isn't it, in the?
no,
Yeah.
Retail,
So,
whatever the zoning allows.
it doesn't really specify.
uses that were operating on or before shall be permitted only for uses that were operating. We did put it in there.
Yeah,
On
well,
or
that,
before.
well,
So
that's
it
the
ha-
language.
If it's retail, it has to stay retail. I think I would be presently of the opinion that because the Kmart is a legal nonconforming use of, I'm going to assume for the moment, a conforming structure. I don't know if it is or it isn't. I mean, if that use were to lapse for more than a year, I don't think this amendment would help them. That's my current thought.
It'll be non-conforming.
It would mean that the legal non-conforming status of that 95,000 square foot retail space will have terminated.
Additionally, if they so choose to change the use and go from a retail to an assembly, that would,
Retail to a what?
an assembly use?
Well, that's one of the exemptions. That's under their, they could go to
Those-
any one
okay,
of
so
those.
those- One of
other-
those-
right.
Okay.
And they could be 95,000 square feet.
Right.
However, if the retail use, which is non-conforming, stops, abandoned, whatever you want to say, for a year, then that use, the legality of that use is terminated. It can't go back. So then you would be talking about expanding something that's not permitted, and therefore you can't do it.
Sheila, I think that's the question you were asking that I didn't process. The distinction between the use and the space.
Yes.
So, yeah, this may not be, now that we're thinking it, we're going to the next step, it may give the owners of that space at that shopping center a year to find someone else. And then the question is, what would the date by which, they would have to expand? Nothing's going to happen within a year. They're going to have to expand it by. So we may not have thought this through as well as we had hoped, because the reality may be that no one, even if someone wanted to come in and expand by, let's say, 20%, that may not be able to happen before the legality of the nonconformity expires.
So you'd have to change the nonconformity law to
We
allow,
may- yeah.
to allow
Are you
that
following
under
what
some
I'm saying here?
circumstance to be extended.
Yeah, we have to think it through.
That would be the logistics.
Came in tomorrow with that.
The gymnastics.
It wouldn't happen
It
within
wouldn't
a
happen
year.
in a year.
Right. They could put a hot dog stand in it or something.
Well, the year starts when the building goes vacant.
Right, but it's very unlikely that a larger retail use would be in place within a year.
Define in place.
Pardon?
Define in place.
Vesting.
Yeah, what's the vested on,
I don't know,
on that?
but now that we may not have solved a problem.
You say this is null and void now?
No, it makes sense. We may have to put another
Few more
Band-Aid on
dominoes
it.
in the queue.
But we have time to do that, right, Chris? Sorry.
Pardon me?
We would have a year to do that.
Yeah.
And I would love that legal interpretation in
No,
writing,
I'm
please.
sort of,
So this could be step one in
And
a
it seems to me the
2 or 3 step process.
resolution of that, if you're going to change
Trickle
the
down.
nonconformity law, would either have to apply to a lot of nonconforming uses, which might invoke a lot of other problems that we can't even imagine today, or be specific to one property, which is also questionable legislating to.
won't be a red-headed Eskimo
I know it
anymore.
won't be unusual for Queen Anne's County, but it really is poor policy.
So we do have a motion and a second on the floor. If there's any other further discussion. So by voice vote, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Abstention? So that's 5-1, motion passes.
Thank you.
For favorable to county commissioners.
Very, very quickly, Amy's going to give you an update on the comp plan.
So we have been meeting with our selected consultant, which is Jenny Smith and Michelle King of Smith Planning and Design. We had a kickoff meeting with the Queen Anne's County COG last evening, and the result of that meeting, other than to familiarize the towns with the fact that we're rolling now and are eager to work with them, and especially work with their municipal growth element areas and desired growth areas, is that we're starting the community outreach right away. Our consultants have used us as a guinea pig on a survey of residents of the county that's very broad, but will give us an opportunity to take the temperature of the community in terms of its favorable or unfavorable feelings of the status of the existing comp plan and the community at large and other aspects of the community. We have paper surveys for citizens who do not have Wi-Fi or broadband, and we have distributed those survey boxes to all of the towns who were in attendance last evening, and we'll follow up with, I think only Millington wasn't able to attend, so we'll follow up with Millington to make sure we're covering the community. We have a survey box located here as well, and there'll be one in the commissioner's office, and we're going to extend beyond those locations. But also there will be an electronic survey. Our consultant is finalizing our specific comprehensive plan update website. So as soon as that website is available, we'll let you know where that is, what the address is, and that is where we'll be making sure that we're pushing out meeting notices. The survey link will be there. Also, as you might imagine, we've already been receiving comments, questions, and applications for comprehensive rezoning requests. We haven't processed those at all, of course, or even officially opened up that process, but there's enough of an interest that I'm already collecting some forms, but there'll be a portal for that there too. We are working already with a technical committee, and that technical committee is comprised of county and state agencies who are actively involved in all aspects of project review and community services. They've been given their pertinent sections of the comprehensive plan for reassessment, whether or not we're on the mark, whether or not there are strategies that have been achieved and can come out, or some areas that might have been problematic. They've been given a tight deadline of the end of this month, and that technical committee is meeting on December 4th. So they're really trying to get us up and running so that we have a full-fledged update process moving by the first of the year, because they have a one-year deadline that I think we're going to make, just based on our initial meetings with Jenny and Michelle. So that brings me to a point that Sheila has raised with me, and that is, how are we going to meet? How is information going to be disseminated? And what does the subcommittee structure look like? So we're having, obviously, a technical committee of county and state employees and others, but also this body is the subcommittee, the processing committee for the comprehensive plan. As this is an update, you will be, since you are the responsible party for drafting this document and processing this document to be handed off to the county commissioners, you are going to be seeing these draft sections at regular intervals. We won't bombard you with a huge chunks of the plan at one time. We'll parse it out to you. We're working on that schedule. For as of now, Michelle and Jenny are intending to attend the Planning Commission meeting on the 9th of January, where we will brainstorm and discuss with you how you would like to see your review move forward. So that's where we are.
And we will be conducting focus group meetings with each town, Stevensville, Chester, the Kent Island, and Graysonville. We will also be reaching out to the Economic Development Commission, so it's not just this group, but we'll be meeting with those folks independently as well, and bringing that information back to you.
Can you forward us all the dates so that we can attend some of those meetings as our
Sure.
schedules allow?
We're still working on that schedule. So once we really get that nailed down, and obviously it's subject to change, but we're really trying to come up with a viable schedule. As soon as that's ready, I'll share it.
And that's why we wanted them brought on in October, so we can do all this prelim, so January 1, we can start focusing on real issues, not schedules. Yep.
Hold on one
We have to
second.
take public comment first.
Are there any other miscellaneous staff items?
No, sir, that's all.
Any other comments from the commission? Any other public comment? Hearing none. Mr. Prince.
Motion moved.
Motion to adjourn, second?
Second.
So moved. Thank you.